up from her seat with a stretch. That was a good sleep. I didn't know that the journey would be so relaxing. Michael and Alistair then both frowned, turning to stare at Nolvi with brows knit. "You crazy?" Michael asked. "Look, it was fun, but it sure as hell wasn't relaxing." He finished with a shake of his head. "Nolvi has always been an oddball," Alistair started, crossing his arms, "ever since we were children." "So you guys have been friends for a bit?" Michael asked, stepping past Alistair and shouldering his rifle. "We all have, save for this lazy, shriveled sack of bones right here," Alistair said, sneering down at the still snoring Theopalu. Hoplite ignored the rest of their conversation as he ducked beneath the pole bar, eyes firmly set on the horizon and the crowds of approaching fiends. He'd need to work fast before the crowd behind the wagon caught up. As Hoplite had that thought, Balmiel the Angel appeared out of thin air next to the wagon. Like last time, the creature hadn't shown up on his motion tracker before it revealed itself, as if it really were being summoned from nowhere. After all Hoplite had seen up to this point, who was to say that Balmiel hadn't been summoned? The rules of this world were still brand new to Hoplite, and until he became familiar with their intricacies, he'd be left in the dark. This feeling of ignorance irritated him more than Hoplite would have expected. Back in his dimension, the rules were clear-cut and simple to understand. At least, they were to Hoplite. Here on Akulis, however, he still felt as if he were only scratching the surface of how things function. Hoplite had asked so many questions, yet he still felt so annoyingly ignorant. Perhaps it had to do with his initial denial upon landing in the forward. At the time, he'd simply written off so much valuable intel as lost colony hogwash. He'd not make that mistake again going forward. Hoplite continued on his path forward, seeing that Balmiel had opted to charge in the opposite direction. Alistair likely ordered the creature to take care of the approaching hordes that were no doubt following after the trail of the wagon. Was Balmiel not susceptible to the death spiral curse? If it truly was an otherworldly being, then perhaps the curse simply wouldn't be able to transfer to Balmiel's alien biology. Or perhaps Balmiel was made of a kind of pure energy. If that were the case, then no kind of curse or disease would be able to harm it. Curses and how they functioned were still largely unknown to Hoplite. Perhaps the death spiral really could infect the Angel. Based on how Alistair carelessly sent Balmiel after the fiends alone, Hoplite guessed that the Angel would be unaffected. Hoplite decided that he would discuss this with Alistair once the surrounding bridge was cleared of any inbound threats. If Balmiel was immune to the curse, then it should be utilized in the field permanently, up until this mission was completed. There was simply no need for the others to risk getting cursed if Hoplite and Balmiel were all but immune to it. True, Hoplite did not know for sure if he really was immune to the death spiral. But with the phalanx armor he may as well have been. If pain could not be inflicted upon Hoplite by a fiend, then he simply could not be infected. He marched forward, drawing the Sectus from its sheath to hold it in a reversed grip. The dark metal gleamed in the fading sunlight, as Hoplite plotted the best ways to end the coming fight as quickly as possible. He did not want to use his guns on the approaching fiends. The noise would surely send more of the infected running to reach the source. Not only that, but Hoplite wanted to conserve as much of his ammunition as was possible. The wagon was flush with ammunition aplenty, but considering the countless numbers of fiends that would be inhabiting the Fiendwood, well, it would be best to be conservative. He braced his foot against the bridge and launched himself forth, barreling toward the coming creatures, with the Sectus ready to slash, completely unaware of the golden eyes staring down at him from the sky high above. Chapter 4. Rest. Stop Hoplite's fist collided with the face of the last standing fiend, its purplish flesh caving inward before falling to the stones with a wet plop. He shook the shards of bone free from his gauntlet and did one more sweep of the surrounding area, seeing that all the still twitching fiends were now fully incapable of moving. Did they still feel agony despite most of their brains having been destroyed? Perhaps the bodies did, but not the consciousness. Was it a mercy to destroy their brains, or would that only send them into a different kind of torture? Were Hoplite's foes currently experiencing eternal darkness? With these mutants being unable to die, who was to say that they weren't? Fiends were undying, suffering from wounds that would never heal for eternity. That indeed was the case, unless all the flesh was burnt from their bones. Again he found himself marveling at the still writhing fiends, broken and battered beyond all recognition, yet still somehow living. Ziwu thought a thought occurred to Hoplite. Then a foolish thought, but an interesting one nonetheless. If Hoplite himself were to become infected with the death spiral, would he still be able to regenerate his own wounds? If so, then the curse would be almost a strict benefit to him. He would become truly unkillable while still able to heal himself due to his mutations. Yet there were too many unknowns involved with Hoplite's potential infection to take that risk. What if it shut down his regenerative capabilities entirely? Or worse, what if he hurt something and infected it with the curse? Fighting the Final Kind's forces would become far more difficult if they weren't able to die. The pain would drive them insane eventually, forcing them to turn on their comrades to ease their own agony. Fiends could heal themselves if they harmed an uninfected host, easing their anguish and spreading the curse further. The Final Kind's forces would transmit the disease through their ranks, eventually infecting their homeworlds and reducing the alien scum to nothing more than wriggling piles of screaming flesh. It could completely collapse their entire damnable civilization. But what if it spread to Earth? Infected Final Kind would no doubt spread the curse to Turnans as well. Humanity would crumble beneath the weight of collective anguish, just as the Final Kind would. It would be mutually assured destruction. That would not be worth the potential immortality Hoplite would achieve. The mere thought of Earth becoming infected nearly turned his stomach. He then turned his attention away from the twitching masses of meat, walking quickly away from the carnage he'd inflicted. Now that this section of the bridge was cleared, Hoplite would move the wagon into the rest stop. The vehicle was still there, parked before the wide entrance. Hoplite had seen Michael Lance, along with the rest of the party, enter this dark, cavernous maw earlier while he had been fighting the fiends. A good idea, for who knew just how many fiends could be lurking within. As Hoplite neared the wagon, he caught sight of Alistair's eidolon, Balmealdoros. The creature's lower half slowly knuckle-walked toward the entrance of the rest stop, its massive three-fingered fists spattered with blood. The upper half of Balmeal, the more human-looking one, crossed its arms as it stared directly at Hoplite. There seemed to be a curious glint in its eyes, and before Hoplite knew it, the creature called out to him. "Outworlder," the angel yelled. "I'd have a word with you a moment, if that is all right." How strange. Balmeal seemed to have two voices, both speaking at once through only the upper half's mouth. One of the voices sounded almost noble, not all too different from the high-born humans of the first arm. The second voice, however, was the complete opposite. It was low, guttural, and savage, as if a bear made of rocks had learned to speak. How many vocal cords did the mutant possess? Hoplite said nothing as the two came to a standstill before the entrance of the rest stop, with Baomiel's upper half at eye level with Hoplite's helmet. Forgive me for taking your time. I realize that it is important to you. Baomiel's voice is said in an almost apologetic tone. But I must know, has the Outworld fallen to Doxar? Baomiel continued, bringing its tones down to a whisper. Did he manage to slip past the pillars? Hoplite blinked in confusion before replying, I don't have intel on any Doxar. A brief wave of nausea suddenly came over Hoplite then, but it dispersed as quickly as it had come. He would likely need to eat soon, he realized. Hoplite hadn't eaten since the Death Day celebration for Muro. That had been around 3 days ago. Certainly that explained why he had felt nauseous out of nowhere. Baomiel then let out a breath. That is a relief. Thank you, Hoplite. It said with a smile, Come, our work is done, and you must rest. I will guard the entrance tonight. I do not require rest. A short moment of silence passed between the two before Hoplite replied, Affirmative. I will be taking the wagon inside. Wise. Baomiel replied. Also, you must not mention Doxar's name. Baomiel said quietly once more, not to anyone. It is a dangerous name, and it would drum up questions that the Pillar Gods forbid me from answering. Why did you tell me then? Hoplite asked, narrowing his eyes. Sounds like a security risk. I needed to know if the Pillar Gods' efforts regarding your world had been in vain. Now, if you please, Baomiel said, gesturing towards the dark archway of the rest stop. Why can you say the name, but no one else? You live here as well. Hoplite asked in his usual monotone. And what did you mean about your god's efforts for my world? Is Doxar? Hoplite suddenly felt nauseous again, yet the intensity of the sickness nearly forced him to vomit, despite his empty stomach. He managed to maintain his composure before Baomiel, standing straight and eye-level with the creature's upper half. Hoplite would need to eat soon, very soon. I will not answer any more questions on this subject. I am sorry. Baomiel said flatly. It is what you would call top secret. I fear I will be punished for even bringing this up to you, but the three heads must know that the Outworld still stands. For their peace of mind. Classified intel, then. Hoplite had no real reason to share Doxar's name with anyone. That was, unless it became important. Already there were a dozen more questions Hoplite had for the Angel. All of them pertaining to Doxar and the Pillar Gods. What were the gods' efforts concerning Hoplite's world? Had they been to Earth before? How was Doxar involved in all this? And how could just his name be dangerous? Baomiel did say that there would be consequences for uttering that name. But what were they? Based on what Baomiel claimed, it was safe for Hoplite himself to say Doxar, but not so for the natives of this planet. Would an Akulian burst into flame on hearing it? Would their deities smite them from afar? Maybe it would just drive them insane, sending them into babbling fits of madness until they finally die. With Hoplite's mind now open to these possibilities, he knew he couldn't risk asking those sorts of questions to his teammates. From now on, he'd treat mentioning the name of Doxar as being fatal, just as mention of Tamira would be fatal, just to be safe. Without a word, Hoplite moved away from Baomiel. gripping the wagon's pull bar and dragging it through the archway. It would be wise for Balmiel to not stand right outside the entrance, where it would be visible for any passing fiends to see. He was about to tell the angel that very thing, but Balmiel had quickly followed after the wagon, indicating that the creature was already very well aware of that fact. Turning his attention back ahead of him, Hoplite bumped his chin, enabling his helmet's night vision to see the extent of the blackened stone hall. It seemed to extend for about 100 feet or so, with no branching paths leading up to the light that shone at the end of this tunnel. It looked to be torchlight, meaning that the others were just ahead. Indeed, it wasn't long before he heard their voices, chatting casually as if there hadn't been any fiends within this place. They certainly had enough time to finish scouting the place out while Hoplite and Balmiel cleared out the encroaching fiends. Hoplite had been afraid that there would be a small horde waiting in here, but it seemed that wasn't the case, unless they had already taken care of them, of course. Any injured fiend within the rest stop would need to be removed from the premises if so. "Hey there, sir," Michael shouted, shouldering his rifle as Hoplite pulled the wagon into a large circular chamber. "Everything's clear." This massive room was bare of anything save Hoplite and the others. It had to be roughly the same size as the amphitheater on the Sparrow, with 4 bowl-like grooves set in the ground. Likely those grooves were meant for a fire, but where would the smoke go? Was there a tunnel in the groove that the smoke could be pulled through? Perhaps these weren't meant to be fire pits, but Hoplite found it hard to imagine them being anything else. He bumped his chin, the night vision disabling and leaving only the light of the team's torches to see by, and Michael's helmet light, which the Marine kept active, despite the already burning light sources surrounding him. The battery life on those helmets was long, but that didn't mean they'd last forever. Hoplite had brought extra batteries for Michael's helmet, but the Marine should still be more conservative with his power usage. "Affirmative. Bridge is cleared," Hoplite replied, stopping to duck under the pole bar. "Disable your flashlight unless needed private." Michael hesitated for the briefest of instants before he complied, clicking off the light with a slightly shaking hand. "Yes, sir," he whispered, tone nervous. He'd need to leave his helmet light on for Michael once it was time to douse those torches, which would have to be soon if the smoke couldn't escape this room. He scanned the chamber again, looking for any potential hazards. This bridge was supposed to be ancient. There was bound to be wear and tear somewhere. What if one of the large stones that made up the ceiling decided to come loose? Each massive brick was roughly the same size as the wagon. If one fell, it could crush the team flat. Yet when Hoplite took this time to observe the brickwork, he was shocked to find that there was no weathering to be seen. Besides the thick layer of dust coating the stone, there was no damage to be found. This shocked him for a moment before he remembered what the Great Bridge was supposed to be made out of. Setstone Lance had called it. It was supposedly indestructible, or may as well have been considering that nothing had managed to even scratch it across all of Akulis's long history. Perhaps they really were invincible after all. The Great Bridges had lasted through 10 ages of history, meaning that even these apocalyptic godling wars had not managed to bring them down. Was there anything in the Eighth Arm's arsenal that could even scratch them? He considered for a moment as he ducked under the pole bar, wondering if a standard nuclear detonation could level the construction. Maybe the stones themselves would be spared, but if they all came loose, then surely the Great Bridge would fall, unless the bricks were unable to be separated. After 10 ages, not even the seams connecting the bricks were worn. Where could Setstone be acquired? With its insane durability, there would have to be some way they could be utilized for the war effort. "This is home," Sweet home tonight. Alistair said with a short sigh. We'll be able to rest easy. Baumil will guard the entrance for us. Well, that's a relief, Lance said with a sigh of her own. I have no need to sleep just yet. I will help keep watch, though I don't believe Baumil will need the aid. She finished, sparing a nervous glance at Alistair. Again, being an elf came with great advantages, such as a greatly reduced need for sleep. If only that had been a mutation that Hoplite himself had acquired during his infusions, his capabilities in the field would have been greatly enhanced. No, Alistair confirmed with a grin. But he does enjoy talking if you want to keep him company, Alistair said, nodding to his Eidolon's wide back. If you aren't afraid, that is. Lance gulped as she stared at Baumil, the lower half's tongue idly licking the dust from the ground, as its upper